everybody. Welcome to our third workshop of the spring semester 2020. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview. So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentor has hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. You know, maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We are bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we are intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there, and we put it out to more people, when we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I like you to do is I like you to stand up. I like you to shimmy it out. I like you to shake it out. I like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out, let it loose, let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're going to say, you know, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you're going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody. But what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program. to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is a referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications and the signups for next fall. One, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers. But more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program and helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this, I would greatly appreciate it, because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you've got any questions during the workshop, please feel free to post them in the comments section. We are going to work on answering them. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@envision-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. So I am so excited to start this workshop and have our workshop with our guest speaker this evening. His name is Lou Adler. Lou actually was a guest speaker last semester. He did such an awesome job that we wanted to bring him back to talk about a new topic, that being how to prepare for interviews. And just to give you a background on Lou, Lou is awesome. Lou is the CEO and founder of Performance-Based Hiring Learning Systems, a consulting firm helping recruiters and hiring managers around the world source, interview, and hire the strongest and most diverse talent. Lou is a best-selling author and active blogger on LinkedIn. Needless to say, Lou has an extensive amount of experience helping people make the most out of that interview. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the interview. Lou, thanks for being here.
Hey, happy to be here, Garrett. Look forward to it and see if I can give some of your rookie interviewers some advice on how to ace it. So happy to do that.
I'm excited for them to learn from you, Lou. So I know one question that I want to just kind of kick everything off the bat with is, I'd love if you could, I know I kind of gave a brief overview of your background, but would you be all right if you just shared with us a little more in-depth overview, like who you are, how you got to this point, why is this a topic that you are so keen and interested in sharing more knowledge about?
Well, happy to do it. I won't give you the long story, but even the short story is pretty long, but I'll basically say I wasn't a recruiter my whole life. I have an engineering background, and I was running a manufacturing company and a logistics company, and hated my boss, and I was pretty young, 30 or 32, and I quit 4 times. Almost every other month I quit because I couldn't stand the guy, and he probably couldn't stand me. But I was starting to use some recruiters, and this was a long time before every single person who will be watching your little video here, Garrett, was born. Probably their parents probably might have had some similar experience, or might have interacted with some of them indirectly anyway. But I became a recruiter. And I realized that recruiting was a fundamentally, or not, I wouldn't say recruiting, hiring was a fundamentally flawed process. Having a manufacturing background, you recognize that, hey, if you're building a part, even in the olden days, you had to have a spec, you had to make sure, and you had to test the spec to make sure what you were building was proper, and you had quality tests, and then you put it out in the field, and you had to make sure it worked. I mean, it's kind of logical. They still do that today. They just do it faster. In hiring, it's not all like that. They don't have a spec. They make judgments based on how they feel, how the candidate asks questions, and they come up with phony and stupid questions, and everyone has their own vote, and they're voting on totally different things. Sometimes it's about how they felt in the morning when they got in, or the argument they had with their family or spouse the night before, or whether they know what the job is about or not. And it's chaos, and it's anarchy, and it still exists today. It has not changed much. So I got into it as a recruiter. I had a specific process I did with hiring managers, but I also prepped all my candidates to live in an environment of anarchy. And I wrote a book called The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired. It's what do you do if you're hiring someone, and what if you do if you're trying to get a job. And navigating those waters was an interesting situation and somewhat tumultuous, but nonetheless, it's an important one. And I can't say that it's perfect, but I can say it does work most of the time if you follow the rules. But following the rules is not an insignificant thing. So that's the story, the short story anyway.
That's awesome. Lou, thanks for sharing that. That's really insightful. So one question I want to ask you is how do you control the interview? When you are a candidate, you're going into this interview, how can you control the interview?
Well, I think it's a couple things. So let me kind of get to the generic situation is ask forced choice questions. That doesn't make a lot of sense now, but it's a candidate will quickly realize that if they're being assessed based on the real needs of the job or it being interviewed by someone who is just trying to do some kind of, hey, do I like you and are you a nice person and you fit? Those are the worst interviews. It's problematic if you'll get the job and problematic even if you get it, if you want it. So I always tell candidates going in is quickly recognize that the interview is a proper interview. Meaning, hey, we're looking for people who are going to be sales reps for this territory. If you're interested, tell us about your background related to that. We're looking for people who are in the software development. You're going to develop the user requirements for our job. Walk me through anything you've done. If it's a meaningful interview, you know pretty well it's a good interview. That's rarely the case, but it might be. So you got to be able to answer that, and I'll give you some ideas on how to answer questions in a moment. When you don't know if you feel the interview is improper and biased or superficial, it's important for a candidate to ask a forced choice question. One type of forced choice question is, hey, Garrett, I saw the posting you had on the meeting notice. I wanted to come in, and I'm not sure kind of the work that you want this person to do. Can you give me a quick overview of what the job entails and some of the challenges the person will face taking that kind of a job? That's a forced choice question. It immediately puts the interviewer on the spot and has to answer your question. And based on the quality of that question, you can say, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me tell you some things I've done, Garrett, that are related to that. So that's the general concept of a forced choice question, and how do you control the interview to ensure you're being accurately assessed. You can go overboard, but that's the basic concept.
That's amazing. Do you mind saying that forced choice question one more time, just so that our listeners and our audience who are watching this right now, I think that you said that a really great question, and I think they may have, you went over it quickly. I want to make sure that they fully get it. Could you say that one more time?
Okay, well, I'll do two things. Number one, I'll say, go back 94 seconds and you'll hear it again. And then I'll say it this way, and then you can see if I say it the same way. During the interview, within a minute or two, you'll know if you're just being asked superficial, stupid questions, and if the interviewer really understands it or there's just a screener. Irrespective of that, if the person's knowledgeable and appears to be appropriate, you'll have to go forward. But if the person is clearly asking what I would say superficial or indirect or wacky kind of questions, one way to do it is, hey, I saw the posting you just wrote for this job. It sounded very interesting, certainly interested in your company. Can you tell me what kind of work the person in this role would be dealing with, so at least I can understand the job and possibly give you some insight with respect to my abilities in handling that kind of job? So that's the basics of the question. It's forcing the interviewer to describe the job in some detail. That's really the essence of a forced choice question.
I love that. That's a great way of putting it. And so how can you ensure that you know that you're getting interviewed accurately? How can you know that you're going on a path within an interview that it's an accurate interview?
Well, it could be, so let me kind of say it. And this would not necessarily be true in a college, going for your first job. So I'm going to first say what it would be like if you were 2 to 3 years into a job and being interviewed, and then I'll bring it down to if it's your first job out of college. Typically, and we train hiring managers around the world. I just trained 20 people in LA, IT managers hiring a lot of full stack engineers. So we went through this whole process. I basically say a good question is, hey, one of the things we need you to do in this job is define the project. In this case, it was design a user interface for people ordering at a restaurant. Immaterial. It's you define the task and say, hey, candidate, have you done anything related to that? So a good question is defining the task and asking the candidate to describe an accomplishment. Another good question is, let's go through your work history. Hey, candidate, tell me a little bit about the work experience you've done and some of the stuff you like to do and some of the stuff that you might not have found it very positive. That's a good question. A college, because we've created interview guides for people on campus interviewing candidates, it could be is, hey, tell me about things that you've done where you've really taken leadership roles. Tell me about things you've done where you've accomplished stuff. So to me, a good question is related to you as a person, the candidate as a person, doing real work. A silly question is, what color is your favorite color? What kind of bird would you say you were? Some wacky kind of question. When you ask those, you know if something is substantive, where someone really wants to understand you as a person, versus asking some silly question that they think is going to screen out the best or the worst, which are useless. So to me, that's how you know if it's meaningful about your background and getting at insight that you bring to the table, it's probably a good question. If it's unrelated to that or feels weird, probably not. And then you have to intervene and ask a forced choice question of some type.
That's a really good and interesting point. Have you, just to kind of dovetail on this, I want to almost learn your thoughts. If you feel like this interviewer can't give you a straight answer and keeps dovetailing off into these weird question varieties, do you subscribe to leaving the interview, or have you ever been in a scenario where you felt like, you know what, this person can't, talk to me straight. I can't even take this person seriously. This is wasting my time. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Have you ever subscribed to that sort of?
Yes, the answer is yes, but I wouldn't walk out because you never know what can happen. So walking out would be the stupidest thing in the world. What I do is I would convert a wacky question like, hey, what kind of animal do you think you are? You might want to say is, well, it depends on the day of the week or something silly. How is that concept going to be used on the job? That's another forced choice question, is convert that into real job needs. So now you kind of put the interviewer back and you say, ooh, this candidate asked me some pretty cool questions. And it will, just that alone, the person will say, ooh, this person really kind of knows what they're talking about. I like this person. Now, if the person's just a gatekeeper and is not really meaningful at all, nothing you can do. But I would still hang in there. You never know what can happen. Might say, you need to talk to my boss, or something else would happen. So I think you can turn it into a positive. Walking out would demonstrate immaturity, poor judgment, and inability to deal with weird situations, which you're going to see these weird situations on your job. So to me, that would be a clear indicator you're not a hireable candidate. And it would get known, the placement office, everybody would know it. So it's not something you want on your record. Turn it into a positive, see if you can learn something through the interview, even why they're asking it, and just, hey, why is that important to the job? So to me, that's how I would handle it. And I can give you an example of something that happened to me many years ago, but I won't. Well, maybe I will. We'll see how this call goes forward.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. So I want to transition. I know this is a question that I think a lot of students have, and it's very difficult. You often see this, and that's the weakness question is, what's your greatest weakness? And so often what I'll see, even with experienced applicants, is they will give a wishy-washy, like, why I'm so amazing. Like, sometimes I work too hard, or I'm too much of a perfectionist, or I'm like too detail-oriented, or just make it too easy on my teammates. How do you handle that? How do you handle those weakness questions?
Well, it's actually, I don't know that they would ask it first, but if they do, you've got to answer it. So let me kind of talk about strengths and weaknesses collectively, and then you can see how you'd handle this specific question. I tell candidates to write down their 5 or 6 strengths they really think they're really good at. Strong at collaborating, strong at technical ability to write code that makes sense, designing a circuit, really influencing other people to do something. So write down those strengths. And I said, then put together a story that proves that strength. For example, if you feel you're strong at collaboration, you could say, well, one thing, I had this project, we were putting a robotics project together. I had people from the IT department, from the mechanical engineering department, and from the AI group. I brought them all together. We had some people in marketing because we had to actually market this. So I brought them all together. We created a whole project plan to be part of this contest. So that's a good story to prove your collaboration skills. So I tell people to write the story down with great details. before this call is ended, I'll tell you how to answer the question. I also say that for weaknesses. What's a weakness that you have, write it down, that you have partially solved? And it could be that you didn't have attention to detail. So you might say something like, well, attention to detail has always been a problem. I tend to like the ideas and I tend to be late, but when I took on this cross-collaboration project, I realized it was important to have attention to detail because I understood that people in other departments might not understand the words that I would use. So I had to get a little bit more clear with respect to that, and I spent some time with their needs. I still struggle a little bit with it, but I'm very comfortable recognizing that I have to offset it this way. To me, that's turning a weakness into a strength, recognizing it, being self-aware that you possess the weakness, be self-aware that you're not going to try to be trite or say, hey, all the things that you just said, Garrett, is with respect to I have too much attention to detail or whatever it may be, which people just blow you off anyway. People say, this person doesn't have any self-awareness. And really, that's the point of the weakness question, is to understand if a person is understand who they are as a person and have gone about something to correct that weakness or at least be aware of it. And I say, I tend not to like people who talk fast, and I have a real problem with that. So I just have to deal with it. I recognize the weakness. It just make it matter of fact. But if you can demonstrate some kind of way you've improved it, I think you're better off.
I like that. The only thing I'd maybe add to that in terms of just one thing that I've learned, and this was from, I believe, the research from Dr. Robert Cialdini in his book Persuasion. He talks about when you're talking about a weakness, say the weakness, but follow it by but, yet, or however, and then something positive about how you're improving it, which I think follows just along the lines with what you just said. But I think for a lot of college students who, for the most part, don't have a ton of experience, I think if you can state a weakness as it is, one, a legitimate weakness, but two, it's something that's completely understandable, you are less likely to be, quote unquote, docked for that. So for example, I think a great weakness answer is, hey, to be honest with you, I'm still building my experience. I'm not the most experienced person in the world. Maybe I've only had 1 or 2 internships in this space, but I recognize I'm not the most experienced person in the world, but I'm actively working towards getting more experience, learning about how I can be better. And I'm eager to grow and be part of a team that can help me be better within this role. What do you think about that, Lou?
I think exactly what you said, but then if a good interviewer, I would train a good interviewer, say, what have you done, Garrett, that would give me evidence that that's true. So It's not just the talk, it's also the fact that you have done it. And I think, so that I go back to the other side because I interview more candidates than I coach candidates, but so that's how I kind of would handle it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lou. Now I want to talk about compensation. This is something that I feel like as a college student, even as a lot of young professionals, we struggle to really know how to handle that sort of, how do we handle that? How do you handle that sort of aspect of the interview?
Now, say the one about compensation.
Yeah, how do you handle that? How do you ensure that?
So what would be the question that would be asked? Give me a sense of the question, because I talk to college placement directors and people in companies hiring people all the time. I mean, generally speaking, if you're an AI engineer and you're in the top school, you're going to get X thousands of dollars plus or minus 5. If you're in a different field, so most of the salaries are kind of public information. So that's why I want to, and I would basically say, what's the point of it all? Understand the job and understand the trajectory. You're going to get paid pretty much the same anywhere. And if you make your decision totally on what you get on the start date, you're missing the bigger picture. So turn that around and tell me, Garrett, what a question an interviewer hiring someone right out of college would ask, so I can give you some more specifics on how to handle compensation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's not necessarily, I'm not as interested, I guess I don't know if I have anything specific as it pertains to what the interviewer may ask, but the concern that I would imagine that many students, and I just know from speaking with them, have when they're going into their interviews is, how do I bring up what my maybe expectations are? Like maybe that information is public. And if that's the case, that's awesome, that's fantastic. But maybe I want to ensure that I know that this number is going to be within the ballpark number of really what I'm expecting. How can I go about asking, is it like what the salary is without making it seem like I'm so transactional that I'm only caring about the number itself? How can I go about, as a student or as an applicant, how can I go about trying to garner what this compensation information is and what the compensation for the role is without seeming so transactional and as if that's the only thing?
Okay, to me, that's a very fair question. It wouldn't be done early. It would be done towards the end of the interview and depending on where it was. So let's assume the person's already on site. You got to, I mean, a lot of this is timing. If this is just a phone screen with a company that they're inviting you on site, you might want to say, in a general sense, is, you know, I've got a number of interviews scheduled. I really like what you're talking about. Can you just give me an idea of what the compensation range is and how competitive you feel you are for people in this category? And just ask it general, like that's a very fair question to ask, as opposed to a specific, how competitive do you think you are? And they might say, well, we think we're real competitive and we really like your background and we'd like to invite you in. And you might want to just get more competitive, more. Can you give me the general range? I do have a couple of offers or some offers pending, and people are pretty, and I think if you just start the conversation, most people would be open about it. To me, that's how I would handle it. On the other hand, I go back and people know that I graduated from college 52 years ago. I remember when I got an offer from a company, I just sent in my resume into a company. I was going to school upstate New York. I got a job in Southern California. It was an engineering job. The guy said, hey, Lou, we'd like to make you an offer as an engineer. I didn't know never even interviewed him. And he said, the compensation is this, which was plus or minus, they already told me what it was, plus or minus 5% of what I was making. And the only question I asked, what's the weather like? I mean, it was snowing where I was March 15th, and this was 72 degrees in Anaheim. I said, I'll take that offer. I mean, it was not much different than that, but so I can't say that it was a very insightful interview. On the other hand, the job I took wasn't, I was a mechanical engineer and this was an electrical engineering job, but it didn't matter. I figured it out. So, but it was still, the weather was good. So that's how I would handle it, though. Just ask a generic question of how would you rank your compensation and benefit package in comparison to other companies like yourself? And they'll say, we're very competitive. We think we can do whatever you need. And if you feel like I've got another offer coming, and that I would not negotiate the offer until you feel you're a finalist or a semifinalist. I guess that would be the advice I'd give. Make sure you're in the game, see what it's like, go forward. And then if they say, how do you value compensation in the scheme of things? I say, well, compensation is not unimportant because I got a student loan I got to pay back, but I'm actually going to look at the combination of the work I'm doing, where I see the career trajectory is, and also the compensation package. And I'm going to put all those things in balance before I make a final decision. To me, that's a fair statement and a logical statement and one that's appropriate.
I think that's a really good point, Lou. I guess I would love to ask, have you ever encountered any delusional companies? Like, I would imagine very few companies are going to say that their compensation is not competitive. I feel like every company is going to say, oh, yeah, we're very competitive. But there's a reason why there's high pay versus low pay. There's a reason why that there's a spectrum, and that is to understand kind of where other people stand. Have you ever encountered companies that thought they were competitive, but in reality their pay was not even close to competitive?
Yeah, but you know that. You can just go to LinkedIn or any of these companies. The salary's hit public. I mean, it's right there. You can look at it, say, so they say they're competitive, and you say, well, I mean, in some way, you already know what these jobs are. That's why I say this is so transparent. I went on LinkedIn to look at full stack engineering positions yesterday for this client, and it said, I looked at some other ones, and they said the range is 105 to 110. It's interesting, and maybe that wasn't the job, but on LinkedIn, I just looked up a certain job with certain years of experience, and it said this company's average pay, I actually had the name of the company, their average pay was like 20% less than what the range was for that specific job, which seemed odd to me. So this salary information is pretty public, and you can, if you do your research, rather than when you talk about being prepared before you go into an interview, when you get to that stage, you know you're being interviewed by this company. You already should know some of this stuff, and if you go in cold, not knowing that, you're going to come across as, what are you talking about? It's right there in salary.com or LinkedIn. It shows you what the salary is. We showed on the ZipRecruiter. It says the post right there is 75 to 95K, depending on experience. So I guess in some way, I think people don't do their research about these whole things, and they don't look at the glass door component. So, you know, you're only going to interview real time with half a dozen companies at most. Do your research. Spend an hour researching a company, their products, what they do, because that's going to be some other questions that you're going to ask during the interview. So I say, if you're not prepared, you're going to, and winging it, you're going to fail anyway. So none of this advice I give you will have any value.
Okay, that's a good point, Lou. Now, I want to take a brief moment. I want to ask the audience watching this right now, I want to ask you all a question, and that is, what are some things that you feel like you can do to help you prepare for the interview? What are some things that you can do to help you essentially go into the interview on your A game? post in the comment section. I'd love to learn your thoughts on that. And Lou, I want to ask you that same exact question. How can a candidate prepare for the interview? I mean, sure, they can do the background research, but are there other things that they can do? Like physically, can they do like a power post? Do you subscribe to that sort of stuff? Can they go about, yeah, what are all the things that you think a candidate can do to best prepare themselves for the interview?
Okay, so I'd say there's two things. Number one, the research about the company, and that should be an hour or two. It should be half a dozen hours if you're to a more senior staff position. But let's assume you understand the company, their products, some of the things that they're doing. You can look at some of their open postings for more senior level people, so you can get a sense of the kinds of people they're hiring. That gives you a sense of the business conditions. On the personal side, I think is more important. This idea of strengths and weaknesses is critical. You have to have a story for your strengths and your weaknesses. You have to understand, I call it preparing to answer questions in 2 minutes or less, let's say 1.5 to 2 minutes. And you have to be good at answering. I use the acronym SAFW. That stands for say a few words. You have to be able to talk in 2 or 3 paragraphs, not in sentences and not in book chapters. Too many people talk too much about themselves. Too many people can't answer a paragraph. People need to understand how you as a candidate talk, and you have to talk for a minute or two in a couple paragraphs to get a sense of how you bring sentence structure together, communication skills together, logic together. So people are actually assessing not the answer itself, but the quality and the communications of that answer. 2 minutes is a good rule. SAFW is a phenomenal rule, and you should practice it. Make an opening statement, says, which is really just one sentence that might respond to the candidate or the interviewer's question. Hey, I'd like to understand your strengths. Well, I've only got a limited experience in that, but I feel one of my key strengths is analytical skills as well as mechanical problem solving or whatever it may be. Amplify that. Throughout my career, at least in college, it seemed like those were the skills that seemed to really help me the most and get me past particularly my toughest classes. Let me give you an example I think that best represents that. SAFW is say a few words, opening statement, amplify the statement, give a few examples, and the W is wrap it up. So based on my experience, both in my intern job I had here, both my college experience, and in just some works I've done, I feel that those are really the things that I'm strong at, but I recognize that I got to fill that in with some strong organizational management skills. So that would be what I would say is a good answer that people have to practice, and then also forced to answer. Is that kind of the thing you're looking for, interviewer? So now it puts the burden back on the interviewer to respond to your answer as opposed to just leaving it hanging there flat. That is a good style of communicating. You should learn that, and whether you're dealing with a business person, with anybody, the 2-minute response. I was talking with somebody yesterday who was a hiring manager for this company, an IT manager, a software development manager. He said, oh, so many people just go on and on and on and on. It's like, and their instant reaction is they're self-absorbed. If you're at 20 to 30 seconds, too short, you come across as an idiot. Can't you talk in a paragraph or two to communicate? So I think learning how to talk in paragraphs succinctly is the critical skill you have to practice. If you can't do that, anything else I talk about is just going to be down the pike. It'll be helpful, but you won't do it anyway. But learning how to communicate is probably the most important thing. Then spend some time in a company and spend some time on yourself. But strengthen, have a story for each strength. Have a story for each weakness, and be able to say it in 2 minutes using the SAFW response. You do those things, you're going to be 95% ahead of everybody else you're competing with.
Dude, that's a really great piece of advice. I can definitely
tell people should actually go back a minute and a half and listen to that 2-minute response.
Seriously, yes, I completely agree. I would say that I have personally interviewed candidates where, yes, they will talk for forever, and we got 30 minutes for the interview. I got through half of my questions, but I'm not going to ask you the rest of the questions because I don't have time to listen to your answers for the rest of these. And that's it. You're surefire not getting a role from that. Vice versa, if I get through all my questions and we got still 5-10 minutes left to go, and it seems like you just like quickly went through all of them, I'm not going to feel great about you either. It's really getting it to be just right. Now, Lou, I want to take a quick moment to ask the students a question because I want to see how their thoughts are in terms of the story behind their strengths. I love students. When you're watching this video, I'd love if you could post in the comment sections what is a story around your strength in terms of why you are strong? What are your strengths? And what is the story behind one of your strengths? I'd love for you to put that in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that and kind of have everybody else share their own strengths and their stories behind why they're strong in that. I think that's a great way to practice and start practicing how to prepare for that strengths and or weaknesses question in terms of just getting your story right. So Lou, I want to talk a little bit about the resume. I mean, this is something that's pretty critical. It gets our foot in the door. It determines whether or not we even get to interview. What are your thoughts on the resume? How can I go about catering and crafting my resume and putting myself in the best position with that?
Yeah, pretty important. I tend to like a one-page resume. So you got to understand put your shoes on the other foot. When you're an interviewer or a recruiter on a company page, or you apply to a job, as opposed to through your placement office, which is slightly different. And I actually saw a couple just last week. 2 or 3 resumes came in for totally different jobs. Well, it was the same job, but the resumes looked kind of similar. And I just asked a woman, Katie, your resume is kind of neat. Where'd you make that? She said, I just went to Word and there was a resume format. And it was one page. And I think it's both your LinkedIn profile as well as your resume. I, as a recruiter, and most hiring managers who are astute look at where'd you go to school? What was your intern job? Did you get any recognition? I mean, I just look at those kinds of things. I mean, that's the thing that, I mean, you don't have a big track record, but if you had an intern job where you were assigned a project and that's distinct, and it's almost like, hey, in 10 or 15 seconds, can I get an understanding of you as a person? Okay, it might even be underneath your name. It don't make a lot of stuff with your address. Nobody cares about your address. So look at your resume, print it out, and have someone else circle the stuff that they see in the first 5 or 10 seconds. Just circle the stuff. And if they circle stuff that's important, you're good. If they circle stuff that, like your phone number and your email or your mascot or your dog or something, it's a waste of time. So first off, when I just physically look at your resume or online resume, is it appealing, and does it highlight stuff that I'm going to look at? Things that I look at and I look at a resume 5 or 10 seconds. I don't spend any more time than 5 or 10 seconds. And I'm looking at, okay, where did the person go to school? What did the person do? What are some extracurricular activities? What kind of recognition did they get? And it could be an honor society, it could be an award, it could be some club or some project you've been on and some other internship. And you're pretty well, that's all you've got. But if you don't sing in 5 or 10 or 15 seconds, they say, no, this is a pretty good person. I got to look at this person. And then they'll look at it. That's why every single recruiter, they're dealing with a stack of resumes or a list of names. If right by your name, if you don't have maybe called a tagline right underneath your name that highlights what you really do and what you're best at, and maybe in some creative way that's consistent with the work you do, like if you're an accountant, you want to focus on attention to detail or accuracy or international, whatever it may be. If you're a creative person, you want to be creative, so you almost have to speak bilingual in your resume. So those are some general tips that I would give with the resume. It's got to be a appealing document. It's a marketing piece, and it's got to highlight in 5 or 10 seconds to say, read me. And then they'll spend time reading it. But I wouldn't go more than 1 page. If you can't do it on 1 page, just like you can't talk in a couple paragraphs, I just move time. I never look at a second page ever in my whole life. And I've been looked at tens of thousands of resumes. I've never looked at the second page. I'll find someone who can communicate in 1 page to get me in the game.
So with that said, I mean, it seems like people do not have too much patience for resumes. They're looking for the key things. What are your thoughts on cover letters? Do you subscribe to cover letters? And if so, how can you go about preparing for your cover letter? If not, we can move on.
No, I think they're good because they're a differentiator, but I think it depends on how you got in the game. I mean, recognize that if you applied to be on a campus interview, and I don't know if that's what you're focusing on here, Garrett, or you responded to a job posting and you submitted it, you got to kind of follow the rules that they offer. So rarely do you submit a cover letter unless they ask for one. So I think that the mechanics of it kind of preclude you from even doing that. If you have an opportunity to do it, so I tell candidates, whether they're entry level or seasoned, is never apply to a job posting. It ain't gonna work. I was at a ATS, which is the applicant tracking system, last week, And they were so proud that they processed 60 million resumes since they've been around. It turned out that of the people who were hired, and I'm going to say 60 million, so that would be 6 million. It seems like there was less than 600,000 jobs that were actually filled. But they would say, we processed 60 million resumes and filled 600,000 jobs. Well, that's 1%. And they were proud of that. I mean, so think if you're a candidate, the 1% chance you're going to get hired. So don't apply. And I would say is, hey, if you're trying to get in there, see if you can get into the back door. Apply, go on LinkedIn and see who's the hiring manager for those jobs. If you see a posting, see the hiring manager for those jobs. It's probably not going to be entry level, but maybe that's where I say I don't know that this would work for entry level because that's kind of a different system. Actually, the college placement thing is much more reasonable and much more effective. But I would just try to find a hiring manager and send a letter to them. Hey, I've done work like this. It looks like you have a problem like this, and I've done work like that. And then describe it and say, I'd love to have a chance to chat with you about it. So to me, that's the back door. Don't know if it would work, but so I don't know if the answer to I've answered your question properly, Garrett, or not. To me, it's if you have an opportunity to do it, I would do it, but rarely you're going to have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. No, I get it. So just to wrap it up, that part, really quickly, if they say, please provide a cover letter, or if they say cover letter optional, you should provide the cover letter. But the big point the big nugget you had identified was that only 1% of applicants through it, like an Indeed job posting, actually get the job. So that should not be the place that you go about applying. You should be going on LinkedIn. You should be reaching out. You should be leveraging the skills that you're learning in these workshops. You should be leveraging your mentor and your network to get your foot in the door for opportunities. Because if you can, you're much more likely to land the role, which I think was a really good point that you made, Lou. So I want to transition. Let's say we got the offer. And we're waiting to hear back from another offer. How do I handle that sort of situation? What if the deadline I get from receiving an offer says, hey, by Friday, we would love to know this answer, and I still haven't heard by, let's say, that Friday from another job that I'm considering? How do I go about ensuring that how can I effectively communicate that situation?
Well, I think I'm going to go backwards. I don't know that you can effectively communicate that situation. Now again, most of the work that I do is with experienced hires, but it could be 2 to 3 years and more. So it's not necessarily entry level. But I tell my clients who are hiring managers and companies is don't make an offer to anybody who's going to compete with you. So be the last person to make an offer. That's what I tell people. So now I go back to, okay, if you're a candidate, and I know in college they make offers ahead of time. So therefore, everyone knows you're going to be getting offers, and they tend to give you a week or two. So now, again, if you applied online and you've got a situation, it's a little bit different. You just got to ask people, when do I have to give you? Just be honest. Say, hey, I've got another couple of offers extending, and I would like to have a week or so before I answer. They're going to probably give it to you. I wouldn't give it to you personally. I'd say, no, here's the offer. If you can't, I'm going to interview some candidates. So I personally wouldn't do it that way. If I was extending the offer, I wouldn't give you any time. I said, here's my offer. Do you want it or not? And if you don't want it, we're fine. But you're going to give 48 hours to give it to me. Most people don't agree with me to do that. And then probably I wouldn't agree with it either for someone who I know is a college student who's not going to graduate for a couple of months. So in this case, but I think the bigger advice is I ask candidates to forget the salary. So this is what I tell candidates. I say, forget the salary. Do you really want this job? Why do you want the job? And what I look at is, do they really understand the content of the job, the work they're going to be doing, and what kind of learning opportunities they have as a result of doing that work successfully? So I tend to ask candidates, focus on what the work you're going to be doing as opposed to what you get on the start date. What you get on the start date, if you got no experience whatsoever with company A, B, and C, is only going to be 5-10% difference. The big difference is which company is going to give you put you on a better career trajectory, a better learning platform, because a year or two from now you're going to be making 20 to 30% more than your start date. So to get hung up on the 5% difference or 10% difference on the start date is very short-term thinking. You got to think long-term. So the advice I'd give if I was a company, I'd say, think about this, But before you take another offer, I'd like you to compare on what you get on the start date, what you can be doing year one, what you could become against all your opportunities. I'd like to engage you in a conversation with respect to that. That's how I would advise a company. A candidate should do the same thing. Hey, I've got an offer from you, Garrett. I appreciate that. I've got something else. The way I want to do it is I want to understand. I have still some questions about your offer, the work I'm doing. I want to compare the offers partially on the original comp package, but I'm equally and probably more important, what work I'm going to be doing and the possible career opportunities that your company provides. That's how I would position it. I don't know if that's perfect advice or an answer to your question, but that's the advice I'd give to somebody, my grandkids or somebody I knew.
That's a good point. You know, it makes me think though, what if we're in a situation where let's say we have a hiring manager who subscribes to the advice that you just gave, where they say, hey, you got 48 hours, make a decision, and they say yes. And then they get an offer from a different company. I don't know if students fully understand the ramifications of like pulling back off of an offer that they had already accepted for a different offer. What are those ramifications?
Okay, so now you're getting into other. Sadly, I don't think there's any ramifications. People are just going to forget you, and there's so much noise in the system. You have 60 million resumes, 600,000. You're just going to be a piece of data. More important for you, the candidate, to say which job should I take. So knowing, if I was a hiring manager, knowing that you're an entry-level candidate for a marketing job, sales job, production job, whatever it may be, I would respect that and say, we definitely would like to make you an offer, but we don't want to get into a competitive sense on dollars. Here's the range of an offer. If that seems like reasonable, I don't even want to put the pressure on you to accept it. We have a conditional acceptance. If you think this is right and you'd like to be a finalist for this, when you get other offers, let's you and I reconnect, and we'll compare our offer against everything else you're doing, but don't make a decision until you see all the parameters of everything else, and let's just do it collectively. That's advice I would give to a company in dealing with this situation to prevent losing good people for stupid reasons, by being the first or second. So I think what I do for a seasoned person who's leaving job A to go to job B, totally different than a college student who's just graduating or after they graduated looking for something. I would try to kind of do it a little bit differently. I would just rearrange how we made offers to people. That's not to say that every company takes that advice, but that's how I would probably do it. So I don't know that I can answer your question properly, Garrett.
Yeah, no, that does answer my question properly. And I think that's really, that's a lot of wisdom there. And I think that's a really mature way for a company to go about making sure that they are making sure that the candidate that they really want's needs are being met, while at the same time being able to make it an open dialogue. I think so often as a candidate, if we get an offer that's not where the money we think it is, or not where something isn't quite meeting our needs, we don't feel comfortable communicating to that employer that this, I'd love to have an open dialogue based on what someone else has offered me here. Can we match that? Can we make that happen? And I think what you're conveying is, if you have that open dialogue, we can make this work. So
no, that's definitely a win-win. How do you pull it off rather than make it sequential? Hey, you got 3 offers, and recognize you're not going to graduate for 2 months or whatever. I think you should have an opportunity as a candidate to explore the things on both the short and long term.
I love that. That's a great point, Lou. So I want to ask the audience one final question real quick, and that is, what is one thing that you've taken away from Lou? What is something that you didn't fully realize about the interview process? I feel like, Lou, you've covered so many great things that are not necessarily intuitive, especially for a student going through the interview process. What is something that you've learned this evening from this workshop? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn one thing that you've learned from Lou so far this evening. But Lou, I want to ask you a question. And that question is, how do you determine what is the most important factor when it comes to the interview? I think this is something we kind of like tiptoed around during this workshop this evening. I feel like I would love to learn your thoughts on how do I prioritize what is the most important component to accepting a job offer.
Now, you're taking that from the perspective of an interviewer or from the perspective of a candidate?
Candidate, always a candidate. Yeah, all these questions are from the perspective of a candidate.
So repeat the question again, now that I understand your point of view. Repeat the question so I can at least appreciate it and give a reasonable response that's clear and using the SAFW response.
Yeah, how do I determine what is the most important factor when it comes to determining what is the right role for me? When it comes to determining what is the right position, what is the right job that I'm interviewing for, how do I determine what is the most important factor for me as a candidate?
Okay, I'm going to actually do it backwards. I, as an interviewer, have asked the hiring manager, or if I was the hiring manager, I know what this work needs to be done. I want people who are intrinsically motivated to do that work. If I have creative work, I want the person to just love creative work and go into a state of flow with it. This is good work. Now, you're not going to be able to do that work all the time, but if you're doing a third of the time, I know you're going to wind up being a great candidate, and then you'll do the other stuff because you have to. But if I can't understand a candidate's intrinsic motivators and provide opportunities that tap into that intrinsic motivator, I'm doing my company, my department, me as a hiring manager, and that new hire a disservice. So that's how I truly believe, and that's what I train hiring managers to look at. Motivation is and somebody I had yesterday was a director of engineering, a software company. I put our formula, which says that ability times motivation squared is critical. And he said motivation, he used the words, motivation is a force multiplier. If you're motivated to do this work without being pushed to do it, you're going to be a great hire. The worst hire is competency and having to push people to just do average work. So if I had to look at it is, what do you as a candidate really like to do? What work do you just get jazzed about, excited about? Maybe it's collaborating with people on problems. Maybe it's getting into the details of some financial statements. Maybe it's putting together a marketing plan and collaborating with different kinds of people. Whatever it is, you have to know what motivates you personally. And as a young person, you might just have a general sense of that. But to me, if I was to make a decision, is what kind of work do you go out of the way where you just felt this is work you like to do? It could have been an intern job. It could have been, I don't know what it is, but then you have to say, okay, this is the work that I like to do. And you might just want to use it during the interview. Hey, this is the work I really like to do. I've done it in the past. Does this job involve that kind of work? So use that as a forced choice question. Because it's very possible they wouldn't even address that. Hey, I really like to do creative marketing where we come up with using multimedia tools and is this part of that job? Well, now you know that it is or it isn't part of the job, and that's how I would make the decision. Understand what you want to do. This is what's going to be successful. This is how you're going to go the extra mile. This is where you're going to do work that you find personally satisfying. And people say, work isn't work if you love to do it. Well, you don't know you love to do it until you try to do it, so you might not have it, but at least you have a sense of it, and I would try to match at those levels. And I say that to the hiring manager as well as to the candidate. Take a job that you're motivated to do. If you're not motivated to do it, you'll go in every day, you'll do it, you'll do average work, but you're not going to do exceptional work because it's not in your wheel. It might be in your wheelhouse, you just don't love to do it. So I think that's the advice I would give to both sides of the table.
I love that. That's awesome advice, Lou. So students out there, if you're listening to this, what is work that you enjoy doing? Work that you easily get into flow with. That is the work that you should be trying to do. That is the type of stuff that you should be trying to do. And you should be very open about that. As opposed to trying to fit yourself into, a circle into a square peg, as opposed to trying to fit yourself into what that job opportunity is looking for. You should also be looking at how can this job opportunity fulfill what you're trying to do? Because ultimately, if it's not, you're going to leave or you're not going to enjoy it. So, Lou, that's great advice.
And that's where the money comes in. If you're doing that kind of work, the fact you pay 5 or 10% less, who cares? That money is, you'll make up for that money because you're going to do great work in a year or two. And I think people don't look at it that way. I know it's hard to look at it when you have bills to pay and rent to pay and car payment to make, and you want to do all this stuff. But when you see the work you do every day, every single day, and I ask candidates who ask me, what's the money? And I say, I want you to forget that. Tell me about the job you've enjoyed the best in your whole life, where you just went into the job because you just love to do it. Was it because of the paycheck you got once a month or because it was the work itself? And 99% of people say it was the work I've done. So I said, so find that kind of work. Let's see if this job represents that kind of work. And the money has got to be competitive, and I understand all that, but it shouldn't be the number one decision. It should be 2 or 3 or 4 on your list. You do those things, you'll be taking the right job for the right reasons.
Good point, Lou. That's awesome. Well, Lou, thank you for being here. Students, thank you for being here this evening. This was an awesome workshop. I really feel like we covered a ton of really great topics as it pertains to how to prepare for the interview. I'm really excited for students, for you all to pursue this next step with your mentor and to continue building this relationship with your mentor and to continue working towards your professional outcomes and goals. Lou, thanks for being here tonight. I'm excited for the next steps that students are going to take. One last question, Lou. How can our audience find you? How can they connect with you? Are there any new things that you're working on that our audience can connect with you on, whether that be a book or a podcast or any blogs that you've written?
Okay, here's what I would suggest you do. You go to Amazon and look up this book, The Essential Guide for Hiring and Getting Hired, and read the last 10 reviews. That will tell you everything you need to know about how to find me and the value of this thing I've just described. The Kindle version's cheap, but the advice is invaluable. You do those things, you'll be in the game. You'll have a career. At least if you make some of the right kind of decisions, you get the right kind of jobs. Do those things, but you got to prepare. You got to understand the game you're playing, and the book has all the rules for both sides of the table. Good luck, everybody. Hiring and getting great jobs and working on great careers. Thank you, Garrett, for inviting me. Look forward to talking with you in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lou. See ya.